Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have Dr. Mohamad Sawwaf with us today, the CEO of Manzil.
Jazakallah khairan and wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me on the podcast. This is one of many events that we participate in, and we always like to use Riz as kind of a platform to not only showcase what we have been doing and the growth upon that, but obviously showcasing some of the new initiatives that we're looking to do. And in particular for Riz, we did a complete retransformation of the Muslim will product that we acquired, which is now Manzil Wills, expanded on just the wills and adding the powers of attorneys for health and wealth, and have the capability now to expand that across the country, as well as garnering a wait list, which we're very good at doing, for the launch of our new Halal checkings account product that we plan to do in 2024. So this will be Canada's first Halal bank account, supported by Manzil, and of course backed by well-known institutions, inshallah. So those are, I would say, the two main things that we're really focused on this weekend.
Yeah, I actually planned on signing up for the Manzil will this weekend. And I've actually been waiting for this for almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it was acquired as another product.
Yes.
So I was going to use that. And then when I saw Manzil took it over, I was like, oh, alhamdulillah. And then I think it was like relaunched. And
yes.
So I've actually been waiting to do this because when I looked at the alternatives, I got a quote. It was like $2,000.
Wow.
Right.
We've been telling people you'll save hundreds, but now I guess we can tell you thousands.
Yeah. And I actually had a friend who... for his will paid $3,500.
Really?
Yeah, and
wow.
To be able to do it online for $150 is
$150 gets you 3 documents: wills, power of attorney for wealth, power of attorney for health. There's a subscription model if you want unlimited edits throughout the year for $20 a year, so like $1.50 a month, less than a coffee. And this way you can continually update and you can refresh your will doc. It's beautifully designed, with Quran verses and arabesque design and style, fully digital. And within 15-20 minutes, you're done.
Yeah. And what strikes me is like we're so hesitant to kind of do these things that are obligatory. Like a will is mandatory.
I'll give you a true story. My wife's uncle recently passed away about a year ago, and literally on his deathbed, while he was I guess last breaths, his wife and son call me and they say, we need a will. And I said, we do it now because we don't know, right? He was still very weak to even sign. Alhamdulillah, we got the wedding signatures, but why do we want to wait until that time where it's like it's inevitable that this is happening? And now we start thinking of this when Allah tells you, right, that we need to plan for these situations. Nobody should even be traveling without their affairs being taken care of, right?
True. There's a hadith for that. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? And so, whether you're doing Umrah or Hajj or even just traveling to see family, your affairs need to be taken care of, right? And we can't have this mentality of, well, I'll just leave my camel there. No, the Rasul said, tie your camel, right? You can't just have the tawakkul. Also put in the effort too, right? So this is a very, very important piece. Again, it's taboo. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to think about death and these decisions that have to be made. But you will have that sense of relief once you have it.
Yeah, there's so much in our deen in terms of financial ibadah that we absolutely ignore, right?
Absolutely.
And we stay kind of...
We're caught up in the dunya.
Yeah, and we stay heedless of it, For me, zakat was one of them, right? Do you remember the first time you paid zakat?
I remember. And, aside from Hajj, which, for most people is unattainable due to price and all of that, like financially, I looked at zakat as something similar, right? And, until you understand your role, right, and the impact that you can create in zakah, it's very easy to neglect. And I remember when I first paid my zakah, I said to myself, I've now fulfilled another pillar.
Yeah.
Right? And so, 4 out of 5, let's say, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
And when you pay zakah, again, ma naqasa min malo sadaqa, right? The Prophet tells it to us in a hadith, right? Charity does not decrease. Your wealth does not decrease with charity. And so why are you worried? When you pay zakah, you're gonna make that money back multiplied, and you're fulfilling a pillar at the end of the day, right?
You know, for me, what happened the first time I paid zakat was the first time I ever built a financial statement. I put all my assets together, and it was the first time I really saw. I was like, wow, subhanallah, I actually have a lot of money. You know,
yeah.
And
it's a reality check.
I had different accounts and different places, and I had moved banks and I'd forgotten about, and you know, and maybe you got a gift, like I got a gift of a gold coin once, and I was like, I have to add that and everything, and once you add all these assets together, then the next part is what are you doing with these assets?
Right.
Like you know, have you know, it's the first step. Every financial advisor, the first thing they tell you is build a financial statement, and it's a part of your deen that you're supposed to build this every year.
Yep.
You know, now is a perfect time. We're going into Ramadan. If you're paying zakat, you should be building a financial statement. But then beyond just calculating the zakat, what are you doing with your assets, right?
And what is the first thing when, subhanallah, somebody passes away from this earth? What happens after the salah? One of the family members will come and say, if there are any debts owed, come to me. Why? Because those are the first things that need to be paid off. And if you don't have a financial statement, how are you going to know what your parent, your sibling, your child is owed unless somebody comes to you, right?
You should be updating your will every year, right?
Absolutely.
Your will, your zakah, your ibadah, they're all tied together.
They're all tied together. And it should be a family affair, right? You know, both parents need to be involved. If the children are old enough, right, that, you know, maybe they're named as an executor, that they need the asset listing, they need the debt listing, right, the liability listing, because at the end of the day, even as part of a Manzil will, the first directive is make sure that my debts are paid off, right, and then there's the burial rights.
I mean, we find that zakat remains as a debt, right?
Of course.
So one of our scholars actually recommend that if you're paying zakat, it's actually you have to have a will. Because you could have zakat left over, and it's a debt you owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah. That's I mean, it's just that we're so, like I was saying, like, you know, I'm from a financial services background, Islamic finance, and I haven't done it. You know, and we're hesitant to kind of look at these things. Right, I think we put them off, and we don't give them the due, and the rest. A lot of our financial implications, right? We're not assigning, you know, a purpose for the assets that we have, right? Whether it's like education for your kids, whether it's, you know, what is an investment. You know, I think mostly we just kind of leave it, and you have to be purposeful in your wealth.
Oh, you're going to be held accountable, right? Every dollar that you've earned and the way that you've spent it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the judgment day is going to ask you about it, right? And if you've left it so that other people can use your dollars in haram activities, well, you're going to be held, because why? Why didn't you do your research? Why didn't you look at alternatives? Why didn't you look at what options were available to you? And it's even worse that options were available to you and you neglected those options. You are now obliged, right, to make an active, move.
Yeah, right? I mean, one of the things, you know, just so you know, like my background is Islamic finance, so my master's was in Islamic finance, and you know, the fatwa that people use the most often on allowing a conventional mortgage, the Qaradawi fatwa. I mean, nobody goes through the conditions that are attached to that fatwa, right?
Well, and that fatwa was for a very specific situation to start with, right?
But even then, like, one of the key conditions on that fatwa is that there is no halal alternative. And the second that halal alternative becomes available, the fatwa is null and void.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's written clearly in there. And
it's temporary.
Everybody refers to it. But nobody actually goes through and reads it, right?
Yeah.
And reads the conditions. And it's like, The second there's a halal alternative, those fatwas are made in times of darura.
Yes.
And then as soon as an alternative exists, the argument for that darura eliminates and that fatwa ceases to be valid. Right?
That's right.
And yeah, I just find it very frustrating that people in general aren't willing to kind of, take that in their deen, right? Take that piece of importance and put it there. And the Quran repeats again and again, don't sell your deen for a small price.
Right.
Right.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. But we tend not to be, I think that, like you mentioned in the beginning, the entire portion of financial ibadah, we leave out, right?
Listen, money is difficult, right? A lot of us in Canada, right? We, alhamdulillah, we're 2 million strong, according to Census 2021. We're growing to 3 million in the next 7 years, right? And that's due to above average birth rates, as well as immigration, right? We hear Minister of Immigration saying, well, we're putting a limit on immigration at 500,000. That's fine. But up to a third, or 167,000, are coming from Muslim majority countries. And so, our population is going to grow by 150,000 a year over the next 7 years. And that's how we get to 3 million. And, for people like myself that, were born here, my parents came in the 70s, early 80s, they came and laid, let's call it, very basic foundations, right? We need masajids, we need halal meat. And the whole finance piece was neglected. Again, because, maybe there's this mentality, especially like back home, we don't have this retirement planning mentality. It's really live for today. Allah will take care of us. And we're focused on today and how are we going to sustain. This future planning mentality is really a North American / Europe, Western mentality. And that's just because of there's systems in place to allow for that. We've never had this, oh, well, we need to plan for the future. We don't know what's going to happen. It's always just today and now. And if we think about, 40, 50 years ago, right? Like my parents came in the 70s, almost 50 years ago. If there was an active or a proactive approach on, well, how do we create a halal financial industry from 50 years ago? Where would the ummah be today? If there was the availability, readily available halal financial products, halal financial mortgage products available 50 years ago, where would the Muslim ummah be today from a wealth perspective? And what then, right, as a secondary, let's call it byproduct, what about the zakat? How much more zakat could we be doing, right? How much more can we help organizations like NZF, right, that are assisting our Muslim brothers and sisters locally, right? So this is the sustainability piece. This is the circular economy piece that I'm really focused on, not only with my organization as Manzil, right, but just from an education and awareness perspective, because we can't have this temporary outlook in life. Of course, the akhirah is forever. And, it needs to be a part of our lifestyle here, our halal lifestyle in a Western country. But why are we not preparing for and setting up our future generations? Because Canada is going to be around, and the Muslim population is only going to grow, right? A lot of people love Canada, right? It's a country that is diverse, and it allows for us to express ourselves in the way that we want. And we are embedded within this society. And if we are continually going to neglect and say, you know what, we don't need these things, they're not important, right? Why are we focused on, things like mal? And well, why not, right? Allah and the Sharia doesn't forbid us from becoming wealthy, right? When you think about the Sahaba, Umar ibn Khattab, like they were rich, right? But they used their money towards good because they knew they were going to be held accountable on the day of judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we've been working on at NZF is kind of quantifying what is the total need of zakat? And the more we look at the research, the more firm we become that easily the Muslim Canadian community can take care of everyone within their community.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, first, number one, alhamdulillah, we live in an environment where the government supports you and the government gives you. But there are large gaps. There are very large gaps, especially with the way benefits are given. You know, they're given on a fixed amount, and the way the housing crisis and inflation has gone up. You know, just a simple example, you have a lot of senior citizens living on $2,000 a month.
Right.
You know, and for many years, that amount is perfectly fine. They're paying, you know, $1,400 in rent for an apartment, and the rest of the $700 goes for food, right?
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, that rent has gone to $2,000 and there's nothing left. And so we have a significant rise in senior citizens.
Yeah, we're an aging population.
Yeah, and who are they supposed to turn to? Right? And there's definitely enough wealth within the community that all of them can be taken care of. So we're seeing the need at around 97,000 individuals.
Really?
NZF already is every year we're helping about 17,000.
Mashallah.
So 97,000 for us, we're doing that with about $4 to $5 million. We think $30 million would be more than enough to take care at the current level of all of the Muslims within the Canadian Muslim Ummah.
But let's keep that in perspective. Like, for those that don't, like, 97,000 may not seem like a big number, but that's 5% of the Muslim population.
Yeah.
It's a large percentage, I would say. And we've actually assessed, you know, a range of what the Muslim wealth here in Canada is. And it's anywhere between $100 billion to $200 billion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Minimum. And a very conservative, like, you know, kind of calculation, back of the hand calculation. And if you take 2.5% of that, that's $2.5 to $5 billion that should be deployed towards zakat. And you guys are only asking for 30 million.
Yeah, and that would take care of about everybody. And it's totally doable. It's totally doable.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, what I think there's kind of like that lack of confidence. One of the things we've been here for 10 years, and we have this process where we have caseworkers who are evaluating everyone who comes and applies for zakat. Your normal masjid, you know, kind of maybe takes a look at somebody and tries to determine whether they're honest or not, just by gut feel.
Right.
You know, our idea is that we remove that and we turn that into a process. So everyone who comes, they go through a questionnaire, we assess them, then they submit 3 months of financial statements from every adult in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have older children, it includes them as well.
Absolutely.
So once we determine what your need is, then we'll go ahead and come up with a plan for you.
Yep.
So we're not there to replace social benefits, and that's never our goal. But our goal is the ones who are falling through the cracks on social benefits, is that your Muslim community should be there to
stopgap
to help you.
Yeah.
You know,
as part of my professional background, I also consult GCC governments on Islamic finance, and I've also consulted, their departments of Islamic affairs, which usually also handles zakat benefits.
Yeah.
And when you actually talk to these scholars that are usually part of these ministries, like there's a scholar body, and of course everyone who kind of works in the organization, they always tell you that zakat it should be a temporary thing, right? For these Muslim families, right? Like, get them back on their feet. It's a transition period. Allahu A'lam what's happened to them and their circumstances to, bring that financial burden to them. But the goal is for them to not be dependent on it.
Yeah.
Right? It should be temporary, and inshallah they'll be better, right? Without it. And so this is where I think that sometimes the Muslim community, there's a disconnect there, because they think that, well, there's the government, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't they relying on them? And the government can give them a permanent solution potentially. But that's not the point here, right? Like, our Muslim brothers and sisters are relying on us, right?
Yeah.
And we have a system in place that they should be able to tap into, right? Just like you said, a process, an institutional process, right? Versus this gut feeling of, yeah, maybe, if so, and maybe. And it's no different than in Dubai and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Like, don't think that these countries don't have zakat eligible individuals and families. They do. But there is a process
Even though
there.
they're so rich, yeah.
Yeah, there is a process there to identify, who's eligible and who isn't. Because, of course, these categories are from the Sharia and from the Quran that we know, right?
Yeah.
And then how do you administer that?
Yeah. When we have people who, subhanAllah, just recently, one of the caseworkers was telling me a story that there was someone, he was waiting for his work permit. He wanted to work. He couldn't. So he had applied for 3 months of zakah. And he had gotten 2 months of food support. And then he got a job. His work permit came through a month early. He got a job. He returned the money. He returned the zakah. And he's like, give it to someone else who needs it.
Perfect.
It was in his hands, and and the day he didn't need it, that was it. And you find so many times where like there are people who really need it,
yeah,
and they're like ashamed to ask, like they don't want to ask, And it's so. There was just another case recently. There was a CBC article about a woman working full time, living in her car, and so we asked our caseworkers, like, are there any stories like that, that you've come across this year? Like after 6 or 7, we just told them to stop. There were too many. There's one where someone's house burnt down. So a father and he's a single father with his daughter, and insurance didn't pay the money. They're going back and forth with insurance. They can't afford another place. They got no payout, right? And they're sleeping in their car for 3 months. And so they don't need, and so because let's say your credit history isn't amazing,
right?
You've got to pay 1 month upfront.
Yeah,
they can't pay the first and last.
Yeah, first and last,
right? So I mean, for us, generally, when we help on rent, you typically need an eviction notice for us to help you on rent or close to it,
right?
So I mean, yeah, you would never think that like somebody with a father and a daughter sleeping in a car for 3 months, going through that, and it's like. There has to be somebody here, the Muslims there to support these people, right?
Yeah.
Like somewhere where they can turn to and where they, and like you mentioned, we have the funds within our community. We have that. It's, what we're trying to do is just build an institution that institutionalizes this and it continues. So it's not dependent on one person. It's not dependent on that. And I think we've gotten to the point where, we can scale. We've invested a lot in technology.
Good.
And we've done that. But like you mentioned, like that money needs to stay within the community, and it needs to circulate within the community for things like these to work, and it goes part and parcel with your entire financial plan and your entire financial outlook, the products you use for this financial planning, for this financial outlook, right? When you care about those, and you have a plan, then all of the pieces fit together.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right.
And I think like, just myself, I was telling my wife for this weekend alone that, right now we're at RIS, this Christmas holidays, like the 2 things on my list that I needed to do was number 1, get my will in order. And number 2, to open up my RESPs for my kids.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I've got 4 kids. Alhamdulillah, just had one recently.
Okay.
And I've been dragging my feet. I've been letting that money, literally go down the drain. The government gives you how much for an RESP?
20%, up to $500 per year per child.
Where do you get 20% guaranteed return?
Guaranteed return.
Right?
That has nothing to do with the market.
There's no risk. You just
zero risk.
And I'll be the first to admit, like I've been sloppy.
Yeah.
Right? I've been sloppy. I've been meaning to do it. But
I tell every parent, I still look at myself as a financial advisor because that's how I started my career. And there is always this stat with respect to RESPs, if you start from day one, like the month that they are born, and of course, in order to get the $500, which is the 20% grant, the maximum per year, you have to put in $2,500. So what is that on a monthly basis? About $200.
Mm-hmm.
So, you put in $50 a week, right? Because you want a dollar cost average. And, by the end of the year, you have $2,500 plus $500 from the government and whatever the growth rate is. By the time they're 18, each child will easily have $100,000 in their account.
Wow.
Easily. And this is like set it and forget it, at an average return of like 7%, which is what the general market does. Over the last 150 years, if you look at what is the average return of the S&P, the Dow Jones, the TSX, 7-8% inclusive of dividends. Why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the earlier you start, the better. You can play catch up. You can catch up on a year each time. So you can actually double your grant to $1,000 by putting in $5,000. That takes care of the current year and one of the missed years. But there'll be a number of years to catch up on, depending on how many you have to catch up on previously.
Yeah. And like doing your banking and your financial transactions with somebody who you trust is so important. I mean, I'll just tell you my example. Like, I remember when I had my RSP payout, right, when I left work. And then so I had, like, let's say $20,000. So I went to my TD advisor and I told him, he was a really nice guy, Ryan. And I told him, Ryan, I don't want any interest. So I just want to leave it there. I might need the money for my studies. This is before I went to do my master's. And so he goes, oh, but it's a waste just to leave it sitting in your account. And I go, no, it's okay. I'm probably going to need the money for my studies, and I don't want any interest. And he goes, okay, don't worry, I'll take care of that for you. And then he gave me a piece of paper. I didn't really read it. I went ahead. Like a year later, I found out that he put it in a 0% GIC.
What?
Basically, he put it in a bond, which is haram.
Yes.
Right? Even though that bond the rate on that bond was 0%.
Yeah. And what are they using with the money for?
Yeah, and there was no benefit. And so I found this out like midway through my master's in Islamic Finance. Right? And these were people who I trusted. Like, I trusted TD. I was with them for decades and decades, right? Like, since I was 15 probably. And I had no idea this is what was happening in the background, right?
Yeah.
And it was my own ignorance. And then as I became, more financially savvy, I think that advice to others is so important that, you have to know, and you have to know who you're dealing with and trust them. Because you can't just assume it, right?
No, absolutely not. And I think the number one thing that we've always, built our business on is, trust and credibility from day one, right? And, that stems from being professional, that stems from, having world-class partners. But the financial literacy piece is huge. Like, when we first launched, we were like, this is it. We're good. And people started coming to us and saying, well, what's an RSP? And we're like, wow. Because why? Our community was never involved, right? They didn't want to get into the haram at the beginning, and along the way, you don't get educated. Yeah. So we're like, guys, we need to actually create financial literacy around what's already available in Canada, which is on our product shelf. But then you have to add the layer of Islamic financial literacy to that.
Yeah.
Right? And so, this has been kind of our mandate to be like, well, let's create the financial literacy, layer it with Islamic financial literacy, and now you can participate, right?
Yeah.
Within Manzil's product shelf.
Yeah. I mean, me just dealing with lots of scholars, for me, I would add the obligation part on top of that, right? And which is that so many people don't understand that the second you have a halal alternative, it is your obligation to choose that halal alternative.
Absolutely.
It's no longer a choice. It's no longer there. So if I have,
can't make the excuse anymore.
Yeah, if I have 5 RESP products, it's and RESP is the Education Savings Plan. It's, you have to go with the Islamic product. It's no longer like an alternative. It's like same with the credit cards.
Right.
As soon as you have a halal alternative for a credit card, it doesn't matter that your rate is higher or lower or whatever.
Right.
That is your obligation.
The parallel to that is Al Rayyan Bank in the UK, right? And up to 40% of their clients are non-Muslim. But when you ask them, they just say it's a superior product, right? Or they got a better deal, or like the Sharia becomes a non-issue, right? At that point, because again, there's benefits and features that Sharia compliant banking products have that the conventional system refuses to adopt. It's not like they don't want to, right?
Yeah.
They want to restrict. They want to control, and that's not the halal way of finance.
Yeah,
Right?
and they don't want your product approved that allows prepayment without penalty when all the other banks do.
Yeah.
Right?
So, a funny thing, a lot of people, I speak to them globally, and they say, like, why does Canadian mortgages revolve around a 5-year renewal rate, right? Like, why isn't it like the U.S., where in the U.S. it's actually 30 years you can go,
Yeah.
right? And so in the Bank Act of Canada, which was, I think, established in 1867, which is like, Canada's independence. So this is over 150 years old. The Bank Act of Canada says, if you want to have a mortgage client for more than 5 years, right? After year 5, you have to basically have no prepayment penalty.
Oh, wow.
So what did the banks do? They said, oh, well, that's not in our favor. We're just going to continually force them into a 5-year renewable product.
Wow.
So we're not going to introduce longer terms that remove this prepayment penalty, or, it's a 3-month interest, right? I think is the maximum. So they're just like, no, we don't want that. That doesn't serve our it's obviously consumer friendly, but it's not bank friendly.
Yeah.
So they said, no, we're just going to stick with 5 years and force them to renew. And if they want to back out, they have to prepay.
Wow.
And, of course, people will argue, well, yeah, some banks offer an open mortgage, but it's way more expensive.
Yeah.
Way more
it's not
expensive.
viable. Yeah. That's incredible.
Can you believe that?
Yeah. I mean, it just reminds me, like, even just in general, like when I was in high school in Calgary, I remember one of my teachers, social studies teacher, he went and he said that his grandfather never got a loan in his life.
Mm.
And that was because the church that he belonged to, if you were known to take usury, you were not allowed to be buried on the church grounds.
Wow.
And this is this society within our lifetime,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Well, that's the thing. I think a lot of people don't understand that the concept of usury is actually within all 3 monotheistic religions, or under the Abrahamic faith, right? It's a thing in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. I just tell people, listen, Muslims care more about it than everyone else, right? And that's why it's a thing for us. But under Christianity, under Judaism, usury is not allowed either.
Yeah.
It just hasn't been widely adopted in this day and age. And even when you think about the definition of usury under the criminal code in Canada, do you know what the rate is?
No, tell me.
So anything above 49%
Wow.
is criminal,
So
according to Canada.
So I know historically that rate used to be 4%.
Really?
According to the church.
Okay.
So what happened is that first the church prohibited all forms of usury,
Yes.
right? And then what happened is that governments wanted to raise money, individuals wanted to raise money.
Mm.
So then they changed the definition of usury. So they said, okay, fine. Usury is if you pay more than a high amount, and then if you give, and some Muslims use this argument up until today.
Yeah.
They say that, oh no, it's only a certain percentage. In the Quran, it says if it doubles, and it doubles.
Yeah,
well,
the doubling.
any rate over time will double. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that.
Yeah, of course. Rule of
it's like,
72.
the only rate that won't double is 0 when you have no interest.
Yeah.
And so the church started off allowing 4%, and then they increased it to 6%, then to 8%, then to 10%. And now, as you see in law, it's at 49%. But the point is that it's still there as a law, as something haram.
It's a man-made
secular
law. It's a
right?
man-made law. This isn't the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Sharia, right? And funny enough, this argument that you talk about amongst the Muslims, I tell them, listen, even when I do my Islamic Finance 101 sessions, the first concept is actually understanding what is usury, or how is riba defined.
Yeah.
And I tell people, I said, listen, in Islam, the only loan you can make is a qard hasan, as a definition of the loan, right? I can't lend you money and ask you for more money back. That's like, and if I do, that's riba. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what you need to understand. Now, outside of that, can you do Sharia compliant transactions of financing? Of course, musharaka, murabah. But there's no lending of money in those transactions.
Exactly.
We are buying assets together, or we're buying them individually and then reselling them for a profit. And I've never lent you any money along the way.
Yeah, and that's exactly what, like, you know, this concept, it's so hard to get across to people very quickly. But, you know, like in a murabaha, like if you're buying a car on a murabaha, which is a sale with markup, you know, people say that, oh, it's the same thing. So in one case, it's like you want to buy a car that's $10,000, right? And so somebody's like, I'll give you the loan for $10,000 and charge you 5% interest.
Right.
And then somebody else comes along and says, no, listen, I'll sell you the car for $10,500.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you give me the money over a year. And then everyone's like, oh, it's the same. Right?
Yeah.
And they're like, so I might as well just do the interest. And what's incredible to me, and I consider it a living miracle of the Quran subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that is exactly what the Quran says. Is that when you tell them to do that, they say, bay or mithla riba.
Yes.
You know, and then they say, why should we do that? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a response, and he's like, he tells them, tell them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made riba haram.
Yeah.
And he made the bay halal, right? Yeah. He made the buying and selling halal. So, and even if you assume they're the same.
And the verse before that or after that says that they will even come to you and argue with you.
Yeah, exactly.
That is the same.
Exactly.
Right?
And I've seen this repeated again and again at dinners, conversations over the last 10 years. And subhanAllah, like it's like, exactly. It says they will argue with you. And up until today, the same arguments that were used at the time of the Prophet Muhammad
1400 years ago.
It's the exact same arguments today.
Yeah.
Right? And nothing has changed on that. And then it's like, if you go even deeper, though, one level, you start to realize where that difference comes from. So let's go back to the example of the car, okay? Now, in one case, let's say you took the loan for the car, okay? Something happened, you lost your job, you come around, you can't pay it. What's going to happen? The person's going to take the $10,500 that you owe him, he's going to compound it,
yes,
and he's going to add another 5% on top of that, right? So now all of a sudden you owe $11,100 the next year.
Right.
Right? $11,100 you're not able to pay. He's going to come back, he's going to add another 5% on that. Now your 11,100 has become 11,700, 800, whatever. Right?
Yep.
Let's say you did the Islamic alternative. Okay? You did it on the buy and the sell. You come back after when you're not able to pay, okay? It's $10,500. What's going to happen? The person will just ask you to pay because you bought. There's no debt, right? There's no loan that's made there that he's going to add interest on, because you can't change the price of the car.
No.
Once you buy something, that price is not changed. So all that happens is that you have to pay. So over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So then somebody says, okay, fine. And this happened actually in Malaysia with HSBC, is that some people would take out loans, Islamic financing, and then just not pay. So then what the scholars did is that they said, okay, fine. If somebody doesn't pay on time, then you're allowed to charge them a fee, right, as a penalty.
Yep.
But this fee isn't profit for you. It 100% has to go to charity.
Yeah, to deter them from doing it again.
Yeah, and every Islamic financial institution has this fund whereby they take a penalty fee and they give it complete. It's a completely different model. Right? Whereas in the first one, the more money you lend to somebody and the less they pay, the more profit you're making. Yeah. Because you can push them further and further into debt. Whereas in the halal financing, I mean, you are giving them financing, but then that's it. You know, you have an agreement, you have a sale, and then it doesn't go beyond that, right?
No, yeah, absolutely.
You know, unfortunately, it's very convenient for people to ignore the prophetic wisdom, you know, the Islamic wisdom behind something, and just never spend their time looking into it. I mean, I've had so many conversations where people will argue how it's all the same. Yeah. And I mean, to me, it's just absurd. It's like somebody insisting that their family eats pork. You know, it's
the best analogy I always give is I tell people, I say, listen, I'm going to put 2 steaks in front of you. What's your favorite cut of steak?
Yeah.
What's your favorite cut?
Oh, ribeye.
Ribeye. That's mine too. Bone in, right? So I'm going to put 2 steaks in front of you. and they look exactly the same. And I'm going to tell you one is halal and one isn't. Pick the one that's halal. You're not going to be able to, right?
Yeah.
Because at the outset, the outcome is exactly the same. But if I said this one is halal, you're going to know that there was a different process that took place, right? You know, that the cow was slaughtered in a certain way. You know, Bismillah was recited on it, right? It was a clean cut. You know, there was no, harm or pain, right? During that process, the blood was drained, all of that stuff. And Islamic finance is no different, right?
Yeah.
There's 2 mortgages or two cars, right? One is murabaha and one is on a loan basis. After 1 year, it's 10,500. The other one's 10,500. Both is 5%. But one is based on profit because there was the acquisition of the asset before it was resold. And the other one was done via the lending of money, right? And that is the difference. So if you can't tell me that there isn't a difference between halal and haram stake, well, then how am I going to convince you that there's a difference between halal and haram financing?
Yeah, and I mean, even on the steak, there's a spiritual benefit to what you're eating, whether it's halal or not, right?
Of course.
You know, you have to believe that, and it's the same with your finances, right? It's not the same. You know, there is, and I've seen it so many times. You know, working in finance, working with people. I was a credit risk manager the last 2 years. You know, I had a portfolio of about $5 billion that I was looking at.
Yeah.
And there were people in there. There were meetings that I sat in where people had hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets, and they were on travel bans. Like they could not leave the country. They were going to the bank asking for money to buy stuff for their kids, you know, because they were so far in debt,
right?
That the bank basically owned them.
Yep.
And it's you see like the barakah removed from their wealth, you know, and it's so hard to imagine. Like there are literally people with hundreds of millions, you know, or tens of millions, and you don't envy them at all.
Yeah. Well, here's another notion, right? Like there's so many brothers and sisters that come to me and, you know, I'm not a mufti, but they still ask the question like, brother, you know, I'm working at the bank and I want to make sure that my income is halal. Okay. And, you know, I could say that I think that there is a proactive approach, a top of mind approach that Muslims generally in the West want their income to be derived via halal means. Okay. And so, but okay, you earn this halal income. Are you keeping it halal?
Yeah.
Where are you putting it? Right? And okay, fine, you're buying halal meat and halal food and groceries to the table, but then you have a mortgage, you have a car loan, right? You have a personal loan. You know, your money is invested at the banks, you know, where it's, you know, invested in assets that are doing haram activities. Have you kept it halal at that point?
Yeah. Okay,
right.
Your bank
so there's
sending
such
money to Israel, right?
There's such a concern, right? With I want to make sure my income is halal, but are you now spending it in a halal way?
Yeah.
And I think that is the disconnect right now.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And that's where you remove the barakah.
Yeah.
Right? Just like those examples you gave with people with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets that can't go anywhere, right?
Yeah. And they've totally removed that barakah. They're drowning in debt, conventional debt. Yeah.
So it's there's a mindset shift here that's required.
Yeah. Inshallah, all of us can look for those alternatives in our lives.
Ameen.
You know, take a conscious decision. You know, you know, now is the perfect time of the year. Ramadan is coming up around the corner. You should
Less
be
than 3
kind
months
of
away.
tax season and Ramadan is at the same time.
Yes.
You know, they really go hand in hand. You know, you should be looking at your assets, putting everything together, and making a plan for yourself, for your family, for your living and for your dying.
100%. Yeah. And that's Manzil's objective is we want to take care of you from cradle to grave. Right? So, you know, as soon as you're born, inshallah, your parents are opening up an RESP account and investing in a halal way. And as you grow up and you know, get educated and you graduate, you're going to say, well, you know, where's my halal bank account? and that'll be available to you. And if you want halal car financing, inshallah, that's available to you. And, halal mortgages for your halal home, and, you get married and you have kids, and that's the whole cycle, right?
Yeah.
And then the wills and the estate planning, right? So,
that is so awesome, because I just had a child a month ago. And subhanAllah, like, it's on my list to open up an RESP for him.
inshallah.
And I myself, I don't have a will. And it, like I mentioned, it's on my list to go put my will in.
Yeah.
And both of them, I would do with Manzil.
One
Actually, I'm planning on doing it with Manzil. I literally had the page open.
and so, one sister came to me about the wills, and she said, I didn't know this, but if you let's say both parents die, right, at the same time, freak accident, maybe car accident, wal-'iyadhu billah. In Canada, you die intestate, meaning without a will. Your children are now automatically state property.
Subhanallah.
So children's services come and take your child, and your family will have to fight now the government through the courts that you are, number one, a legitimate guardian, and that you have the capability and the means to support them.
Man, I'm getting chills just listening to that. That is so
actually
scary.
Worse in Quebec.
That is so scary.
It is worse in Quebec, and we all know what's happening in Quebec with their laws, that are Islamophobic, to say the least.
And to
why would you do that?
Yeah, for $150, you could just avoid that. It's just
absolutely.
It's a huge reminder. I mean, for myself, again, all of this is huge reminder for myself. I don't have that will, but it's something which I need to take care of, inshallah, this week.
Inshallah.
Yeah, and all of us need to not delay it and put it off. I know it's uncomfortable thinking about your death, but it's important.
It is.
And as Muslims, we prepare for our death. Whenever somebody asks, so when will the hour come?
Mm-hmm.
The response is, what have you prepared for it? Don't worry about when the last day will come.
Yeah.
Worry about what you're doing for it, right?
No, exactly, right?
Yeah.
And we see what's happening around the world. Nobody knew when that day will come, whether it's in Palestine or Kashmir or Sudan or Congo or Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. Nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
And, and then what happens is whoever you've left behind has to pick up the pieces. They have to figure things out on their own. And why would you also want to burden them with that?
I've seen that. I have a friend in the UK, and his family has been at war in the courts for 8 years now on inheritance. There was no will, and everybody's arguing. 8 years it's gone on, and he's in the thick of it. Yeah, it's just unbearable. I mean, you wouldn't want to wish that on your enemy, let alone your relatives.
100%. Yeah. So be proactive, and if you don't love your family, or if you love your family enough, you will think about this and you'll do it.
Yeah.
Right? At the end of the day, and you're fulfilling a sunnah, you're fulfilling a right, you're fulfilling an obligation, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam have asked you to do, right?
Yeah, and there's wisdom behind that. It's at our peril we ignore that wisdom.
100%.
And thank you for making that available.
Oh, my pleasure. It's our duty, right? It's a responsibility and a burden we carry on behalf of the Canadian Muslim Ummah. And we're here just to fulfill, right? At the end of the day, we look at ourselves as, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the education. He gave us the skills, the professional background, the academic background to be able to fulfill this, right? I was working for financial institutions that weren't Sharia compliant. And I remember continually making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because people would come to me and they say, your income is haram. Right? And, that's, I was 22 when I started, and, life was good. And, it definitely, changed my life and my family's life. But of course, there was this constant intention of how can I take this, my learnings, academic, professionally, and serve my ummah. And I didn't know I was going to do this. I didn't know it was going to turn into this at the end of the day. And slowly but surely, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the turner of hearts. Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi aw qulubana ala dinak.
Yeah.
right? And you make that dua and you say, oh Allah, oh turner of hearts, turn my heart, right? And make it steadfast on your deen, right? And
I mean,
this, this is the number one dua that the Prophet ﷺ used to make. Imagine the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, used to say this dua, and it was the most said dua by him.
subhanallah.
Imagine a prophet, he would ask Allah to make sure that his heart was steadfast and on the path of deen.
Wow.
And here we are today thinking we're equal to or better than, right? With our egos and our arrogance, our kibr, walayadhu billah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remove that kibr from our hearts. And so, the intention was made, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to be the vehicle for him in this particular part of the world, to say this is how you're going to serve the ummah. And with as many trials and tribulations that we've had along the way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been on our side, and He has allowed us to overcome even the steepest barriers.
May Jazakallah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you and everyone at Manzil success.
Ameen ya Rabbi.
We're rooting for you here at NZF.
Jazakallah.
And inshallah, thank you for being here. And we're
my pleasure.
Continue working with you.
I mean, we'd love to, and just need to continually grow and get our voices heard, get it out there, get the support, and inshallah, it just benefits our own at the end of the day, right?
All the pieces of our community.
Yes,
to fit together. Yeah,
exactly.
Jazakallah.
Well, yeah. All right.